This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. For 6 years beginning in 2010, Stephen Fabes cycled 86,000 kilometers across 75 countries, from the scorching deserts of Syria and Afghanistan to the freezing Mongolian steppe. He survived blizzards, landslides, marauding school children, and a run-in with a gunman. Along the way, Stephen slept in the homes of people in more than 50 countries and is convinced that goodwill is global. He also raised more than 20,000 pounds for an NGO to help prevent disease and establish local health services. You can learn more about Stephen and his adventure at cyclingthesix.com and stephenfabes.com. Stephen Fabes, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Hi Paul, how's it going?
It is going great. One of the things that I wondered about was, because when you began this adventure, you were working as a doctor, what was it that motivated you to want to stop your career and go on this big adventure?
Well, it was a really difficult decision actually at the beginning, because I loved my job and I was enjoyed living in London. I had sort of friends and family around me, so it wasn't an easy choice. But I guess the idea came from an experience I had when I was quite young. I was 19, and for 5 months I travelled through South America by bicycle with my younger brother. So that planted the seed of doing a much longer journey by bicycle. But it took me quite a long time to get around to it. I'd always had an interest in travel. I'd spend any time off I got to go into sort of far-flung places and travelled a lot through different countries when I could. So I was never really much of a cyclist, but I was always very passionate about travel, and especially in wild places and in the middle of nowhere, because I think you get that sense of vulnerability when you're in that kind of situation, which I think is quite appealing. That was really it. That was the bike ride in Chile. It first inspired me to do it, and then a lot of soul searching, and then I decided about 2 years before I left to take off on a round the world bike ride.
I was wondering if some of that soul searching involved thinking about your age, because many of the people that I interview that do this are 22, 23, and at the time you were 29. Did you stop and ever think to yourself, "Oh, it's too late"?
Not really. I think I'd got to a point where I suppose as you get towards the end of your 20s, or as you get through life, time seems to be moving a little bit faster, and I definitely felt that and thought, well, I'm going to be working for 40 years or something, 45 years, so probably. So, even if I take 5 or 6 years out, that's just a small chunk of that time. It's not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much. So, yeah, I did probably take off on this trip a little bit later than most people do. But I think it was a good time to do it, because I'd got a foothold in my career. I'd worked for about 4.5 years as a doctor by that stage. So I developed some knowledge and skills. And then, when I'm coming back to the profession now, it hasn't been too traumatic. It's been kind of all right. But I think if I'd only had a year or two's experience, or I'd gone straight from medical school, it would have been much more difficult to come back to work. So I think it was a good time to leave, actually, looking back on it.
I don't know how it works in the UK in terms of your school debt and so on, but I can imagine that if you were an American who had just got out of medical school with a lot of debt, your parents might think, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing?" Did you get any pushback from your family at all?
I think actually if I was in the US, it would have been impossible for me to do this, because for the amount of money that it costs to go to medical school there. So the fees are going up a lot in the UK at the moment, increasing. But when I was in medical school, it wasn't too bad, quite cheap. My mum was very supportive, actually. She was, right behind me, no problems at all. She didn't try and convince me not to do it. Yeah, as I said, I think I was just thinking, I'll be working for most of my life. That I was in no doubt about that. I love being a doctor, and I knew that I'd be doing that for life. But I just thought, what's 5 or 6 years out of that all of that time that you're going to be working? It's a drop in the ocean, really.
How much time did you spend planning for this 6-year adventure?
Probably started planning 2 years before I left. And a lot of that was a bit of going over routes and researching equipment that I needed and trying to get sponsors and doing a bit of fundraising for the charity. So those kind of things. I think looking back, I don't know, I think a lot of it was probably fairly useless. It's quite good fun planning big journeys though. So it's good getting maps out and sort of daydreaming about what I was going to do. But of course, when you hit the road, a lot of those plans just, go up in smoke. It was good fun, but I don't know how useful it was actually.
Tell me about your bike.
I used the same bike from the first day all the way through the whole 6 years. So it's a very durable bike, built to last. Of course, I had the same frame, but almost every part of the bicycle was changed. So I think I had more than 200 punches. I had 14 bicycle chains. I had 10 sets of pedals. I had more than 20 sets of brake pads, lots of front hubs, 5 roll-off hubs in the back. So the only sort of slightly odd bit of kit that people might not know about if they're not into cycle touring is that my gears were internal. I had a roll-off hub on the back, so 14 gears which were all inside the hub. But other than that, it was just a very robust bicycle, and it made it all the way around the world.
I read through a big chunk of your blog, and in the beginning you were calling your bike Belinda, but then at the end you were contemplating calling it Crazy Max. So what is it now?
Yeah, that's right. I think Crazy Max definitely was the one that stuck at the end. I called it Belinda. I think you need a name for your bicycle when you're traveling so long on a bike. It gives it a bit of personality. But I remember when I was getting towards the end of the journey, the bicycle was getting quite beaten up looking and a bit shabby. And there was a guy, I think it was in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, and he looked at it and said, it looks like something from the film Crazy Max. And I sort of thought about it, and I thought, oh, what do you mean Mad Max? And he's just like, Crazy Max, Mad Max is the same thing. So I thought, well, that was brilliant. I had to call it Crazy Max after that. So it was, as I said, the same bike, but definitely was quite well used by the end of the journey and looked a little bit of a wreck. So Crazy Max is the name that stuck.
You went through 5 roll-offs. If you were going to do this again, do you think you'd stay with the decision to go with the roll-off?
A really tough one. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I don't know anyone else who's gone through so many roll-off hubs. The company were exceptionally helpful when I did have a problem. I was provided with new ones free of charge. They were, sent out to me in quite remote places, and they arrived quite quickly. So places like Sudan and Mongolia, I got new hubs. But obviously, there is some problems with them. They're perhaps not as durable as the company would like you to believe. Perhaps not as durable as their reputation, but I still really like them. I still really like the fact that you don't have to do any tinkering with the derailleur or anything like that. And when things go wrong, it can be a bit of a problem, but they were so good to me that whether I'd use them again, I just can't answer that. I'm really on the fence on that one.
Let's talk about the adventure and some of the continents that you were on, cycling the 6, because you cycled 6 continents, Europe, Africa, South America, North America, Australia, Asia. When you look back on those 6 continents, what was the most challenging part of each of the 6?
Asia probably was the most challenging out of all of them, I think, because for lots of different reasons. I mean, it's difficult. There's lots of bureaucracy. Your visas are shorter. You've got the language barrier, and the languages in Asia are much more difficult to learn than other places, I think, for English speakers. You're always going to be cold somewhere when you're crossing Asia by bicycle, unless you do it exceptionally quickly, because obviously you're in the northern hemisphere, and it's a large continent. So for those reasons, Asia's quite difficult, and I made it especially difficult because I went to Mongolia in the wintertime. So I think Asia was the toughest, and I think that the toughest times were usually when I was very cold. So Mongolia was difficult and a very remote place as well. In Europe, I was pretty cold as well when I left. I left and returned through Europe, and both of those times were during the winter time. And the first time I went through Europe in 2010, it was the coldest for 31 years, and it was brutal because it was not just cold, but it was very wet as well. So lots and lots of snow. It was about -20 at night time, which made things very hard, and especially because it was so wet. It felt even colder than that. So that was pretty tough. Africa was an adventure. You get a bit freaked out by some of the wild animals in Africa, I think, especially when you're cycling through places like Botswana, very wild places where lots of wildlife roaming around and no fences, quite sparsely populated. In South America, I think the toughest bit was probably some of the high Andean passes. Also, my favourite part of South America, but it's sometimes very difficult because you're in the mountains for a long time without getting to a village or somewhere where you can resupply. So you're carrying a lot of weight on the bicycle, and that caused a lot of problems for me. North America, the hardest part of North America was probably the end bit in Alaska, going up on the Haul Road, which is that road. I think it was used in Ice Road Truckers in one or two of the series of that TV series. But it's the road that goes all the way up to Dead Horse on the Arctic Ocean. And even then, in August, I was there in August, and it was snowing. So that's how far north it is, right up inside the Arctic Circle. And of course, you've got bears to worry about and stuff then. So when you're camping, you've got to kind of get your food out of the tent and stuff. They were the toughest bits of each continent, I think. Australia was relatively straightforward, although I was there, again, the wrong time of year, in the summertime in Queensland, which was extremely hot, and you had lots of heavy downpours as well. So that was a kind of recurring theme of my journey, was being in the wrong place at the wrong time of year, and I messed it up quite often.
What would you say is your favorite part of the world to travel through?
I don't really have a favourite part of the world, I think. I enjoyed lots of places for different reasons. I mean, I think the landscape in South America is what stands out for me, particularly because there's lots of roads over the Andes. You can get into some really remote and extremely beautiful places. So for me, it's one of the best places for cycle touring in the world, the high Andean passes. Hospitality, the Middle East, I think, across Syria just before the war, and they've got huge amounts of hospitality, and the same in places like Turkey as well. I think Asia's very, very interesting because it's just culturally so different to my home country. So that was one of the things I really enjoyed. And when you're in those places that are very culturally different, it just feels like more of an adventure. Just you feel a bit more alive when you're going through places and you can't really understand anything, and it's just much more interesting. So I think those were some of the highlights, and I think the wild animals as well is always good when you're traveling by bicycle. Sometimes you can get quite close to wildlife because it doesn't necessarily know you're there until you're quite close to it. So that was the case in parts of Africa and Australia as well.
How about in terms of danger? What would you say was the most dangerous part of the world you cycled through?
I think there's a couple of places. Afghanistan was certainly dangerous when I crossed the border from Uzbekistan. Didn't go too far into the country and then came back the same way. And it was a very difficult decision as to whether I would go there or not, and whether to tell my family and that kind of thing. I think it would have been extremely dangerous to try and cross the country, but I felt that the risk wasn't too great if I was just going to go to this city called Mazar-i-Sharif in the north and then come back to Uzbekistan. So just dipping in, really. And I didn't have any problems there. Everyone treated me with respect, but it was, you got a sense that this was an area of active conflict, and there was lots of military around and things like that, and warnings of Taliban and stuff. So it was quite nerve-wracking at times. The only other area that I remember being a bit dangerous was northern Kenya, which is this area which is big area, poorly administered, lots of tribes fighting and some bandits coming in from the east. So it's a little bit dangerous, and it's got a bit of a reputation at the north of Kenya. I didn't really have any problems there at all, actually, but it was somewhere that I needed to have my wits about me, I think.
That's a good segue into a theme that kind of recurs on your blog, where you're wondering, is what I'm about to do, am I being brave or am I being stupid? What is it that tips the scales that makes you go one way or another with that decision?
It's a really difficult one. I don't know. I struggled with it, and especially when talking about Afghanistan. I was really fascinated by the country, and I really wanted to meet people and try and find out a little bit about what it was like for them, and I wanted to kind of it was just a fascinating place. But at the same time, I didn't. It's very difficult to find the information about how dangerous a place is. It's difficult to know what information you can trust, because if you look at the British Foreign Office website, it's always going to be extremely cautionary. They have a sort of vested interest. They don't want citizens of the UK going off and getting into sort of dangerous situations, but they are sort of over cautionary. So it's a very difficult one, and you just have to try and gather as much information you can as possible, and then make the choice. And the other thing is just trying to reduce the risk to yourself whenever you can. But obviously, a lot of exciting, adventurous things in life entail a bit of danger. So I don't think it's appropriate to be really worried all the time and not doing stuff because you're scared. I think it's just making that, trying to figure out what the right balance is. And I don't think there's any one answer. I think it's different for every situation, and you just got to do what you can to try and reduce the risk to yourself, I guess.
You weren't always writing alone. For a couple of the sections, you had some friends join you, Naomi and Claire. What was it like for you to have some cycling companions versus just riding alone?
It's great. I think it's really important for me to be riding on my own for a bit and then be riding with other people. I love the bit of both. I'm fairly happy with my own company, and I think traveling on your own is a great way to travel, because you do get mixed with other people a little bit more, and it does feel like a bit more of an adventure, and you can make your own decisions. But equally, I love traveling with other people. It's much more fun, especially if you're traveling with somebody who's quite open and personable and interested in meeting people. Then actually that's often a huge advantage as well, and a good way to meet local people. Yeah, I said I love to mix it up, so I really enjoyed cycling with Naomi through Africa. We'd probably drive each other a bit mad after a while, and then we just sort of split up for a week or so, and then we'd ride back to the same point and cycle together again. So that worked really well. And then I cycled with Claire. Claire was my girlfriend. We were together 5 months, so we cycled up through Australia and Indonesia together, and that was fantastic as well. And then my friend Ollie, I was cycling with him for a month in Georgia. So yeah, it's very important for me to have those periods where I was cycling with other people. It was good to be with someone who was sort of familiar, a familiar face, and to share the experience with someone. And of course, one of the problems traveling very long time on a bicycle is you do get quite lonely. So it was something that, looking back, was something that kept me going, I think, knowing that, that I had someone that I was going to meet at some point, and then cycling with them and then being alone for a bit.
So when you meet local people along the way, they always want to lend a hand and help you out, but sometimes they're very poor and they're giving you, it seems like, almost all that they have. Was it difficult for you to accept that help, and did it get easier over time as you went along?
Yeah, it was. I mean, you're always often going to feel guilty, I think, in that kind of situation where you can see if people don't have much. And I think that's okay to sort of feel like that. That's a very normal reaction. I often struggled with knowing whether to give anyone money if they'd hosted me. I didn't want to kind of encourage a situation where foreign people would always be, giving money to people, and rather it wasn't out of generosity, but because it was wanting money. I didn't really want to encourage that kind of situation to develop. But at the same time, if they're treating you to food and they don't have much themselves, then it would be a bit strange not to offer something in return. It doesn't have to be money necessarily. I remember spending time to speak a little bit of English to the children, sort of like impromptu English lessons, or giving us a photo of your family, or something else. You can give a small gift. It doesn't necessarily have to be money. But often money is what people need, so I would play it differently depending upon the situation. But yeah, there was always that feeling of guilt. Yeah. But I think, as I said, that's fairly normal.
Just a little bit of a side question here in regards to the money part that you mentioned. you were always being asked the value of your bike, and it was a question that you said you really resented and you never answered truthfully. Why was that?
I don't know. I think this is probably true for a lot of cycle tourers who go around the world. I don't know if I really resented it, but it definitely because I just always think them. I don't know. Um, difficult one to answer. I don't know. It's just that perhaps I felt that there were. Because again, perhaps because of this guilt feeling, and that if I answered honestly, then that would be vastly more money than someone earns even in a year in a lot of places. So perhaps that would make me feel even more guilty than I already did, and sometimes just incomprehensible amounts of money to some people. So that's perhaps the reason why I didn't like answering the question. And maybe I thought there were better questions to ask as well, because that seemed to me quite a sort of materialistic one. But then it's completely understandable that someone would want to know how much the bike costs.
So how did you hold up physically over the course of the adventure?
Pretty well, yeah. I mean, obviously cycling every day keeps you quite fit and healthy, so I didn't have many health problems. You're always going to have some stomach problems when you're eating in strange countries, and I think especially in India and Myanmar and stuff. But that's part of the course, and you just have to get on with it. I had dengue fever in Malaysia, so that was quite ill for about 10 days, and that was probably the sickest that I was during the journey, but I wasn't really in danger or anything like that. And I was getting blood tests every day and stuck in a hostel trying to get my appetite back. So I was out of action for 10 days with that. But I didn't get malaria, and I didn't have any other problems apart from with my left knee, which was often a problem. It was swelling up and painful, and I had to have surgery on the knee quite early on in the journey. But other than that, I was pretty healthy, I think, and my weight fluctuated quite a lot depending upon where the mountains were. And I think I got down to about 66 kilograms when I was in Peru. I was about 80 kilograms when I started. So, yeah, quite a lot of weight lost at one point or another.
How about now? You've been back for, I think, 6 months or so now. Do you have any lingering effects?
Yeah, I've been back about 5 months, and that piled the weight on since I've come back. I think you got that lag because you're still eating like a cyclist for a while, and it's very difficult to cram all the amount of exercise that you were doing when you were cycling all day into my routine at the moment because I'm busy. I've got lots of other things going on. I'm back at work and I'm trying to write a book. So yeah, it's difficult, and I'm thinking about going away on another sort of little journey which might burn off a few calories, but at the moment I'm appalled at how fast the weight is accumulating. I'm a bit worried about where that's going to end.
But in terms of bugs that you picked up along the way, no lingering effects from those?
No, nothing like that. No, fully recovered from the dengue, and yeah, I feel sort of fit and healthy at the moment, really.
You mentioned in your blog about your patience, and you often didn't have a lot of patience early on. And I'm wondering, I'm trying to link these two questions together, but did anything change over time with how you traveled? Did your patience improve, and did you travel slowly, or did you more slowly over time, or
yeah,
anything change with how you traveled over the course of the 6 years?
I did slow my pace down as I progressed through the journey, and that was for a number of reasons. I think primarily because I ran out of money, so then I'd have to spend days where I was going to be writing or speaking in schools. That were the two main ways that I made money during the journey. So I had to plan days off, and so my whole pace of travel slowed down. I think probably a lot of people in the start, they get very excited about a round the world bike journey, and you're just much more head down going for it. And you realize after a period of time that the experiences that meant most to me, the ones that really lodged in my memory, were the ones where I got off the main road and took the back roads, and even if it was slower and tougher and the road was terrible, I'd always have a much, much better experience. People were more surprised to see me, and it felt like a real adventure. So I did more and more of that, I think, as the trip progressed. So that was very much a pattern. I would make up a bit of ground going the rough direction that I was traveling, and then I'd get off on one of these like mini adventures into the mountains and do a loop, and then kind of rejoin the main thrust of my route. So I think I did that more and more as the trip went on, and I made sure that I did take time to go off and explore more remote places. And there was definitely a bit of one-upmanship going on kind of with myself. I think I was trying to get into slightly more remote places and more difficult passes, and that was a game that I was just playing, I think, as the journey went on.
What was your budget, your average daily budget or average monthly budget?
I didn't have a strict budget, but I would say that I would comfortably live on less than $10 a day on average. That's not including flights and stuff like that, but it's sort of daily spending money on food and accommodation. And obviously it varied depending upon where I was, but I think I as an average over the 6 years, I think I could say that comfortably less than $10. Yeah.
You worked for a time in a backpacker's hostel. What was that like?
Yeah, it was okay. I was just doing it because I got to Cape Town. It's the only time that I stopped during my journey for any significant period of time. I got to Cape Town, and then I knew that I was going to South America next, and it was winter in Patagonia, and I didn't really fancy that, having been so cold in Europe in the winter. And that would be Patagonia in the winter would probably be worse. So I thought I'd wait out the winter in Cape Town, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I landed this job in a backpacker hostel, and it was a strange one. My job was ambience manager, and what I had to do was essentially inventing drinking games for backpackers. So it was a bit odd, but it was pretty easy, and it was something that meant that I could afford to stay in Cape Town, and I did a couple of talks whilst I was there as well, and worked on my blog and got a bit of a few articles written for magazines. It was good fun, but I don't know now. I didn't explore as much of South Africa as I wanted to by bicycle because I had the job and I had to stay in that one place for a bit.
You had to invent drinking games.
Yeah, exactly. And I had to cook a barbecue on a Saturday. So yeah, it wasn't too taxing really. It was quite easy.
Can you give us an example of a drinking game that you invented?
Well, there was the classics, so sort of beer pong and that kind of stuff. And then I think we had like a bra hunt at one point where we just like hid bras all over the hostel. We had to find them and then drink forfeits and stuff like that. So yeah, loads of weird games. I can't remember any of the others now, but yeah, there's quite a few. Lots of card games with alcohol as well.
The iPod is something that is a theme throughout your blog. What are you listening to?
All sorts of stuff. I mean, podcasts I got really into towards the end of the journey. So I listened to quite a few podcasts and then music frequently and really depending upon what mood I was in. But yeah, sort of lots of hip hop and drum and bass and reggae and breaks and stuff like that. So yeah, it became quite important because your brain's just working away and sometimes you just get stuck in these sort of pessimistic thoughts or you get the same thoughts just rotating. You need to turn that off, and so music and podcasts was a good way to do that. What I loved about this journey is that you have a lot of time to think, and that was something I really relished, and I realized it was something that I could have done with when I was at home, but I didn't really know it at that point in time. So it was important not to listen to too much music or too many podcasts, and I'd never listen in the morning or anything like that. I'd like the quiet, and I'd like to make plans, and that's where I'd sort of write my blog in my head, kind of thing. And I appreciated all that time to think. But then sometimes when you've just had too much time to think, then it was important to have something that could sort of cheer me up a little bit. And music was a really good way to do that.
How did your writing and your photography improve over time? Because I noticed that you started winning photo competitions and writing competitions and so on.
Yeah, I did. And I think this was something that it was interesting because it was driven very much by the fact I ran out of money. So I initially thought this is a disaster. I've been going 3 years, I've run out of money. I know that I'm only halfway around the world. What am I going to do? Actually, looking back, it turned out to be one of the most positive things about the journey because I ran out of money and then I thought, right, okay, how am I going to solve this? Okay, perhaps I can write for magazines. And then I needed to learn how to write for magazines. So I kind of analysed magazine features and I read books about the craft of writing. And I started reading widely other books and novels and memoirs and travel books. So it takes a long time to learn to write well, I think. And it's something I'm still improving a lot at the moment. And it's something that I loved doing as well. So then I started writing for magazines, newspapers, and then entered a few competitions and won a few prizes towards the end of the journey. It was a really, really, really nice side effect of this journey is that, hopefully I've developed that skill of putting words together in an engaging way. And that's something that actually you can use in lots of different areas of life as well. It's going to be very satisfying to write the book. And the same goes with photography, really. I'm a real amateur. I'm not very technically good at photography, but I think I developed a bit of an eye as I got through the journey. And I had lots of opportunities, of course. There are some places that I went where it was almost impossible to take a bad photograph. So I've got some great photos on Flickr, and a few of those won prizes as well towards the end of the trip. And I'd love to get a photo book out as well. I think I might do that in the future.
Stone Cold Steve Austin or Steven Seagal? What's your preference?
Steven Seagal, I think that was in the old Soviet countries in Central Asia. That's how people would what people would say when I said my name, because those characters were the most famous Stevens, not Stephen Hawking, not Steven Spielberg. It was always Steven Seagal, and Stone Cold Steve Austin as well. Yeah, it's true.
At one point in your journey, you met a Swiss biker who had around 200,000 kilometers of cycling around the globe. And he gave you some advice, but you don't specifically say what the advice was. So I'm wondering, is that, what was the advice that he gave to you?
I think perhaps from him it was just about the route that I was taking. I think I met him in Turkana, and he gave me some advice on how to cross this very desolate place, which is very difficult to navigate because there's only sandy tracks, there's no proper roads. I don't remember getting any sort of life advice from him. I met another guy who'd been on the road for an extremely long time, Heinz. I met him in Germany, and he'd been cycling for 51 years and got home a couple of years before I'd met him. So yeah, I stayed with him for a few days, and it was really a bit of a pilgrimage to meet Heinz. Like I kind of changed my route so that I could go by his house, and that was a really interesting experience. Very passionate, very dedicated guy who'd spent an extremely long time on his bicycle and had only just got home. So yeah, it was very interesting to meet him.
If you have to give out some advice to a beginning cyclist at the early parts of their journey, what would you say to them?
I would say don't over-plan the journey. A lot of that planning at the beginning is kind of worthless, really. Always take, or when you can, take the rough, more difficult roads, even if it's going to take longer, because that's where you'll have the real adventures, and that's when people are more welcoming. I would say find a way to connect with the people that you're going to meet along the way, because one of the great things about traveling by bicycle is that you do breaks down lots of barriers. It's much easier to meet people than it is, I think, if you're traveling in a vehicle. So find a way to connect with them, because unless you're a linguist, it's very difficult to really, share details of your life and find out about what it's like living in a different country, in different circumstances. But I think if you've got something that in common with people, or if you've got some connection with them, then perhaps it is a way to find out a bit more. For me, that was healthcare, and I'm a medical doctor, so I visited lots of medical projects and met with patients and doctors and nurses, and was able to have translators around sometimes, so I was able to find out a little bit about what it was like for them living or working in a place. And that was extremely rewarding. So, and I've met other people doing other things. You know, there's a guy I met recently who was really into jiu-jitsu, and he was like making a film about jiu-jitsu and then visiting different jiu-jitsu gyms around the world as he traveled. So I think just think about what you're passionate about and try and find a way to connect with the people that you're going to meet as you travel by bicycle, because it's the people that you'll remember. It's the people that really shape your experience of a place.
What have your travels taught you, or perhaps made you appreciate more about your home country?
They've taught me good things and bad things. I missed home a lot when I was away. I missed particularly the British sense of humour, I think, and I missed obviously people more than anything else, my friends. But I always had home to come back to. You know, I have that luxury of being able to save money up and going to see the world and being able to get visas into places. Whereas if I was born in a different country under different circumstances, that might not be a possibility. One of the things, I got very emotional when I came home, and just everything was like a reminder of what I'd missed, I think. And I sort of stopped off in very British pubs on the way from Dover back to London, and really was sort of drinking in the Britishness really that I'd missed since I'd been away. There were some slightly frustrating things as well. I'd just come from Germany, Belgium, France, all of which had pretty good cycle lanes, and then you get into the UK and it's just a disaster. You know, big holes, potholes, and then cycle lane just starts and then finishes in 10 meters. And I thought the provision for cyclists was really appalling, which is a bit distressing because, you know, in the UK there's lots of talk, politicians always talking about how cycle friendly places are, but in reality they're not. Doesn't seem like they're doing very much compared to our neighbours in Europe. And then, of course, I came back at a very tumultuous time. My profession were on strike, the first strikes in 40 years from junior doctors. So I walked back into that kind of situation. And then we've had other issues as well with leaving the EU. And it feels a very unsettled time to be in the UK at the moment. And for me, quite a depressing time, actually, especially, looking at the political situation. So not always positive, but definitely glad to be home, and I missed home an awful lot, especially towards the end of the trip.
Do you have any regrets about taking the trip? Do you look back now and go, man, maybe I shouldn't have done that?
No, I definitely have regrets. No regrets about leaving at all. That was 100% the right decision. I sometimes maybe have got a few regrets about routes I didn't take or whatever, or plans that didn't come to fruition. I'd love to have done a section of the journey by boat or by raft or something like that, and I had plans of doing that in Peru, and it just never came together. So there's always little things like that will nag. And the other thing I suppose that I regret is not finding this healthcare angle earlier on in the journey. Throughout Asia, for the last 2 years of the journey, I was visiting medical projects, often ones around marginalized people. And it was a huge learning experience for me. It was a great way to connect with people. I just wish I'd thought of something like that earlier on in the trip, because it really opened my eyes to lots of different things. So yeah, that's one of my regrets. And the other thing was not keeping a detailed enough diary from the beginning of the journey. I kept diaries all the way through, and I used those to blog and whatever. But now, coming to the point of trying to write a book about the trip, I realised that it's going to be probably impossible to write a book about the African section of the journey, because my notes are just not detailed enough. I wasn't a travel writer at that stage, and I wasn't noting down all these details that you really need if you're going to evoke a scene of in your journey. So that's one thing I wish I'd done differently as well. And I got better at that as the trip progressed. My journals became more detailed, and I wrote down a lot more.
There's a great photo, I think it's on your website, that it just shows like a stack of journals.
Yeah.
Are those all your journals from this 6-year trip?
That's only some of them actually in that photo. Yeah, I've got many more. I'm looking at them now in my bedroom, and I've got, I don't know how many, probably 20 or something moleskins, which are completely full. So Yeah, it's good to look back on those, and it's incredible how much you forget. Really quite worrying how much you forget. When I look back at that trip that I took in Chile when I was 19, I've only got snippets of memory now. I've lost most of it. I cycled the same roads, 14 years later, and I've forgotten almost all of it. So it's frightening. And so when you get home, really, once the memories fade, you're going to have photographs and you're going to have your journals. So that's another bit of advice I think I would give to those going out on a big journey, a big cycle tour, whatever it is. Just document it, because it's otherwise you'll forget a huge amount.
So when you do interviews and things like this, what's the one question that you wish people would ask you that they never do?
The one that people don't ask very often is the one you've asked, actually. Is like, do you have any regrets, or what would you have done differently? I think that's a really good question to ask anybody who's gone off and done something that you're aspiring to do, whatever that might be. And it's a question that I ask as well when I meet other adventurers and people who've done exciting things, because I think, if you're looking at your experience, you're trying to learn from how to improve it, and that's a great question to try and help you plan your trip and your adventure. What else do people not ask me? I don't know. I mean, I get asked so many different questions that almost everything's covered, I think. I can't think of anything that people don't ask me, and I wish they should.
Stephen, what's next for you?
Well, at the moment, I'm busy writing the book. I've got an agent now. I've put together the 25,000 word proposal, so it's which includes 3 chapters and all the marketing stuff. So that's going out to publishers in the beginning of September. So looking forward to that, and I'm really hoping that get a good deal, and then I've got to write the book, and I'm going to do that over the course of a couple of years. So still a long way to go, but it is definitely coming together. At the same time, I'm working back in my old hospital at St Thomas's. I'm doing a bit of emergency, a bit of critical care, and a bit of general medicine as well. So lots of different wards. And on top of that, I'm trying to keep fit, but not that successfully. I promised myself for 6 months I wasn't going to go disappear off on another journey, and I definitely wasn't going to sit down with a map and make any plans, because I've been away for 6 years, more than 6 years, and I was just happy being home. But I feel that feeling creeping up that maybe I will go off and do something. I miss being outside and being kind of immersed in the natural world. I'm not sure I want to announce anything yet, because I don't know for sure whether I'm going to dedicate myself to it, but I've got a few ideas of things that I might want to do adventure-wise. And the only thing I'll say at this stage is that it's not going to be on bicycle, I think, at the moment. I'd love to do a very long run. I think that would be something that's a completely different type of challenge, but I'm just a bit worried that my knee's not going to hold up. So at the moment I'm running quite a lot, and hoping that the knee is gonna kind of survive the training. And then if it does, then I'm thinking about going on a sort of multi-day run here in the UK.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
I've got a blog that I kept from the first day of my journey, and I posted every month, quite long posts sometimes, but I've got a huge back catalogue. So if you go to www.cyclingthe6.com, that's the number 6, then there's all my blog posts there from 6 years of cycling around the world. And I've got a new personal website as well, stephenfabes.com. And my blog, the Cycling the 6, is getting a big update at the moment. So it's a bit old at the moment, but it's going to be updated. And I'll be continuing to post on there, writing articles and stuff relevant to what I'm doing at the moment, and thinking back to the journey and any upcoming adventures as well. I'll sort of document them there, and a few opinion pieces and general musings, I think.
Stephen Fabes, congratulations on the accomplishment. Good luck on the book, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks very much, Paul. Cheers.
Recorded July 22nd, 2016. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.